Hi, it's me, Liberty. I am here today to do a book review on the book I just finished, which was Healing Trauma by Peter Levine. This book is deceiving for 90 pages. This book was filled with tons of information. And it was deceiving because it also came with an audiobook CD in the back to listen to with additional exercises in it. So basically, my takeaways from Peter's book, this was an amazing book. I read the book, I don't even remember the name of it, Bessel van der Kolk's book. I read that book. That was a big book. And so I've been doing like somatic psychology for the past few years now. And so reading this book, I already knew a lot of the concepts of somatic psychology and the effects that PTSD has on the biology of the human. So, you know, the exercises were the meat and potatoes of what I did in the book. I actually read through the 90-page little book. I don't even know what I did with it now. I read through it and then did listen to the exercises, did some with a friend, some by myself, some with my therapist, and then I also listened to the audiobook again just to, get a sense of what the exercises really were so that I could continue to work on them because, as a trauma survivor, I need to be aware of my body, and I'm a chronic dissociator, so my problem is a lot of freeze. I'm a fawn freeze, fawn fight, fawn, depending on the situation, usually fawn freeze, fawn fight. So for me, being kept in my body is very, very, very important to me to lead a life, to lead a productive, happy life. So this book really brought a sense of body autonomy, which was shocking to me because as a dom, I felt like I knew my body autonomy. I knew, but it was really interesting for me. So it was really cool. So the basis of Peter Levine's theory is that trauma is in the body. It's not really psychological. It's more in the body. It has psychological symptoms, but it's more of a body. The problem is the energy is stuck in the body because when we get activated, we have like a spike of our adrenaline and our cortisol, which causes us to do the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And then in a normal cycle, you would get the activation and then you would get a discharge too. And so what happens in trauma is that we get activated and then we stay activated. We don't ever really discharge the body trauma or the body activation. And so that activation stays with us, and then, when we're triggered, it all comes back. So, I found it really interesting because in the first section of the book, he's going over what PTSD is, how we get it, and then he talks about how the animal nature of how animals are not traumatized, and he described, I don't remember what antelope, I think it may be an antelope, maybe it was a gazelle, I don't know, but he talked about how, or no, it was the bear at first it was the bear, and how there's a video on National Geographic of a polar bear being shot with a tranquilizer dart and then subsequently being tagged. And as the bear is coming out of the anesthesia, it does this this trembling and shaking, and then it does foot movements like it were to complete a run had it not been stopped. And then, it kind of gets up and on its wobbly legs shakes a little bit more and then takes off. And, in the book, Peter says that this is the natural way a human would also release this activation cycle to prevent us from being traumatized. So if a human were to have something like this happen, we go into the state of shock, we come out of shock, we complete what we would have done had we not been immobilized by this freeze, because the basis of his book is about the freeze response and how to counteract the freeze response in the body. So how we as humans would complete the action we would have taken had we not been immobilized, and then to shake it off and discharge and then move on with life. So I have so many notes. This was such a good book. Like, for 90 pages, it's very, very deceiving. There's a lot of information in there. And the audiobook is actually like 6 hours long, I think, because it includes the CD into the book. So it's really good. But, so there were like, was there 12 phases? I believe there's 12 phases that he goes through on getting back into your body and like kind of reorienting to your body and then releasing the energy. So, and then there are also 12 basic concepts of trauma work, which I can talk about the 12 basic concepts first and then go over the phase. And so the 12 basic concepts were the phenomenon of being riveted, which means, we had an overwhelming event. Our bodies were not able to handle everything that came at it, and so we had this spike of adrenaline, cortisol, all of this activation due to the event. And then the second basic concept of trauma is the feeling of defeat and helplessness, which, if you've ever been in a traumatic situation, you will often feel overwhelmed, like there's just so much coming at you all at once. And then also the helplessness, where you don't feel like there's anything you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. And then the third is the tracking of awareness, which is our inner world, our feelings, which is like the feeling sense in our body, like, oh, my shoulder is kind of pinchy, or my hip is kind of achy because I got a new tattoo yesterday, or it feels like I've got sandpaper on my side, the feelings in the body, and then the sensations and the thoughts are part of our inner tracking of our awareness. And then pendulation, which is moving. I don't really know how I could explain that. In the book, what we did where we would feel the painful sense, and then we would switch our focus to a non-painful location, or a location that felt good. And so you would like move into the pain and then out of the pain, into the pain and then out of the pain. It's pendulation. So you don't fully like immerse yourself into the feeling. You do, but not like forever. You do it and then you come out and you focus somewhere else, and then you do it. So it's almost like practicing. You'll practice and then you'll come out. You'll practice and then you'll come out. So, and then the fifth concept of trauma work is resourcing, where we build our inner resources, our outer resources, the things that help us in times of struggle, or in the times of trauma, or re-triggering, whatever. Number 6 is the uncoupling feelings of excitement and fear and trauma. So this is, where we remove fear from our traumatic experience so that we can reprocess. The 7th is grounding and centering, which is, grounding into the earth, a form of meditation where you really feel your feet on the floor through your body, and you get centered, and you do, the practices of connecting with your breath, connecting with your body. The 8th was strength and resiliency, which is all about like building those strengths and being able to pendulate into and out of. And, there was one exercise, I think I'll talk about it later, where you collapse and then you bring yourself slowly back up. And the ninth is restoring natural aggression, which a lot of us, when we are traumatized, we're afraid of our anger. We're afraid that if we tap into this anger that we could really hurt someone. Like really hurt someone. So, reconnecting to this natural innate response. Um, and then 10 was running, which that's basically working through the flight response. The 11th is orienting, where we get a feel of our environment. And then the 12th is self-regulation, which comes with the self-awareness and the tracking of the body. So the one quote that I took out of this for my personal wall of quotes was, remember, body sensations rather than intense emotions are the key to healing trauma. And I underlined that and starred it and wrote it in my journal and put it on the quote wall, because that is important to me, because I have been through processes where I have, immersed myself in all of the icky, nasty emotions and just cried for hours. And yeah, it helps. It's cathartic. It helped, but it didn't solve the trauma. It didn't fully resolve it. And so I kept trying to find ways, and that's how I ended up finding the somatic psychology and BDSM and all of that, was this trying to resolve the trauma on a non-emotional level, because I had solved it on an emotional, intellectual level, but not a body physiological level. And so that quote means so much to me, that the body sensation are what's most important in healing this trauma. And also that the way to heal it is to allow our bodies to do what they wanted to do at the time of the trauma. If you were tied down, what did you want to do in that moment? Your body wanted to break free and punch and fight or run. So it's allowing your body to go into the body sensations of the trauma, and allowing your body to do what it would have wanted to do naturally, and that it does the activation and the discharge. So it allows us to actually discharge the physical energy that's locked in our bodies. And so the content, and that's what I've noticed over the years, is that the content of my traumatic past doesn't matter. When I'm talking to my therapist still doesn't know half of the details of my trauma, because it's not important. Her being traumatized by my trauma is not going to help me. It's not going to resolve the stuff going on in me. So the content of the traumatic memory does not matter. And I know that that's probably heresy to a trauma survivor, because when I first heard it, I did not like it. I was no, I have to own this thing and that thing happened, and if I don't own it, and I'm never going to be able to recover. And that's not true. You just need to know how your body felt, not how you emotional. And that was another thing that I had gotten stuck on, was I thought, it was how you felt at the trauma. And it was I even talked to my therapist later. I was even after 30 something years, 30 years, I still don't have the words to describe how I felt in those moments. And it wasn't until, reading that quote that it was it didn't matter. It doesn't matter how I emotionally felt at 4 years old being raped. It mattered how my body felt and what my body wanted to do at that moment. So that was fantastic. And he also described how this can help people that are not super traumatized. He used an example of an Inuit hunter a boy that was studying psychology. He had moved, but when he was an Inuit boy, he had like a special pair of pants made by his mother so that he could go hunting with the men in the village. And I guess like during his trek, he got attacked by a group of dogs, and they had bitten his leg and ripped his pants, and he was like literally traumatized by this, even 20 years later, whenever it was, when he was talking to Dr. Levine. And so I thought this was a fantastic example because it was a minor trauma, and the examples he used in the book were fantastic, because he talked about how the boy had anchored into like the he wasn't even holding the pants, but he was like visually holding the pants in front of him in a visualization, and he felt the pride he felt that his mother had made these pants for him. He was going to be a polar bear hunter with the men of the village, and so he was like filled with this anchored state of, you know, pride and love that, you know, these pants were special to him and they were made for him. And so he was able to anchor that. And so when he was physically going through the activation and the discharge, he was able to, you know, maintain that anchor of the pants being a reminder of this pride and love or whatever. And I took that from that. I don't think that was a lot in the book, but I took that from it because I love anchoring. And he talks about when they went through this trauma with him, in the pants, he had anchored this confident, you know, state, and then envisioned watching himself killing a polar bear with the men of the village and having this sense of pride. That's what it was. And then using that when going, because they built the resources before they went and pendulated into the trauma. And so when he pendulated back into the trauma, he was able to use that. He'd never really killed a polar bear, but he could like see himself killing a polar bear and the blood and all that. And so he envisioned himself killing the dogs. And then he also, after killing the dogs, envisioned running up a pole. So it was like he envisioned fighting and he envisioned flighting. And then he saw, when he was like doing the orientation, he then saw his village, another village elder was like carrying him home, and he was able to, he thought his father was like angry at him for like 20 years over this incident, and going back into it from like a more third person perspective, he was able to see that his father was not angry. His father was frightened, worried about his son. And so like that really helped him, and then he was able to discharge this traumatic event, and then his body was able to go back into equilibrium, finally, after all these years. And that was just a minor trauma of getting attacked by a dog. So, like, yeah. It's, all of this is basically, I always called it recreation, but I guess recreation, in the technical sense of Peter Levine, is where you actually unconsciously do the trauma reenactments. And the actual therapeutic is renegotiation. So where you actually go in and renegotiate what happened and work it through, and that's how you get the release or the discharge. And so that's basically what I had been doing over the years with the BDSM stuff. So it was interesting that this is actually has a valid scientific basis or valid psychological basis. So the renegotiations are, and I had been thinking the renegotiations for me were, you know, I would go back into the trauma, I would pendulate into and like try to see how I felt emotionally and see like what events occurred and see what I needed to do to recreate a BDSM scene to renegotiate. And that's how I had been doing it all this time, instead of seeing that it didn't actually have to be a physical full reenactment. It could just be a visualization and a, like, I think one of the and one of the phases, the discharging of the flight response, is me and my youngest or my middle child did this. We put a pillow on the floor, because what you do is you put a pillow on the floor, and then you envision yourself as like a cheetah or a gazelle or something. You're the gazelle in this one, and then you're like running for your life from the cheetah, and you're like, run, it's, or no, it was a baboon. It's like, run, it's a baboon. And so you like run in the pillow, and like you're physically like discharging this running energy. So it's like you're not really reenacting an animal charging at you, but you're in your mind, you're reenacting this, and then your body is acting out the action of running. And so I see that this is helpful for me in that I can visualize my trauma reenactment and not actually have to go to the dungeon and act it out. I can visualize it in my mind and, like, you know, pull out the whip and just crack the air, or like, you know, claw down the air. Like, it doesn't really matter how. I don't have to have a partner here to beat the holy hell out of to reenact my trauma. I can do it in my mind and in my body. So I'm not going to stop beating people that want to be beaten, but you know, it doesn't have to be like, I can do my own trauma recovery work on my own, and then my BDSM is just a expression of my creativity, or an expression of my intimate connection with another person, or, you know, maybe I'm facilitating the healing work in them, where we've renegotiated their trauma, and I'm actually facilitating working through their trauma with them, which is ultimately, you know, what I do. But so the whole, if you read this book, it's fantastic. Like, the very first exercises are like, you know, you tap on your hand, and you're like, this is my hand, it belongs to me, these are my body boundaries, and you go over your whole body, and then you get in the shower and you do the same thing with, you know, pulsating water, and you really gain a sense of body autonomy. Even if you thought you had a sense of body autonomy, it can definitely help reinforce that, or, you know, maybe help you get back into the body if you've kind of escaped to other places just in the stress of everyday life. Not necessarily traumatic dissociation, but just normal everyday dissociation. So going through the exercises was awesome, because I was able to see that, you know, I have a greater sense of body autonomy, and then the grounding. So the first thing was the tapping and the body boundaries, and then the next was the grounding and the building of the inner and external resources, because I know I made a list. You draw a line down the paper and you write what got you through trauma internally and what got you through trauma externally. And so and then the third through the fifth phases are body tracking, where you find like what you feel, where you feel it, and getting like that sense of oneness with your body. And then phase 6 starts the pendulation, where you start to go into your pinchy shoulder. You'll feel the pinch, and then what feels good? Oh, this other shoulder feels really good right now. And so you'll pendulate, pinching, and then good feeling. And that helps to gain more awareness of our body, and also give us a sense of, you know, broad and narrow, or not necessarily broad and narrow in this, but a sense of, like, we're not all consumed by this one minor pain. Even if it's a major pain, we're not consumed by this one major pain, because we do have focus, and that builds self-awareness. And then the phase 7 starts the actual discharging. And for him discharging the fight, Dr. Levine, like, uses hand pushing and like leaning up against the backs. That was kind of interesting. I tried that with my kids. They don't really understand like the whole back leaning thing. So that was kind of interesting. So I discharged my fight in a very different way. I may have gotten my whip out and may have like punched the air and whipped the pillows a few times, but so like that, the fight of the pushing on the hands and the back wasn't enough for me. But it actually got me into the mind frame that I was like, oh, like, okay, I can see like how just pushing with my body can be my body fighting. So that was kind of cool. And then the discharging of the flight again was me and my middle child. We put a pillow on the floor and ran from the baboon. That was really fun. There was a lot of pet play in this book, believe it or not. I was actually quite surprised. I was like, oh, I get to do pet play. So that was kind of fun. And then after discharging the flight, there's resilience, where again you do the collapse, where you actually feel how you feel when your body collapses in on itself. When you sink down and and then after you do this full compression, then you slowly, one vertebrae at a time, and then you just come out of it. And that's supposed to help you see that you can, be knocked down and come back up, be knocked down and come back up, in a way. And then phase 11 was about the orientation, and that's not sexual orientation, that's orientation in your world. So basically, I learned a technique in NLP. I forget what it's called. It's some Hawaiian name, but my NLP teacher taught me to do like this, and then you go narrow and broad, and then you go narrow and then all the way broad, and it's like a whole process. So I already had like that concept of going narrow and broad, but this was more of a like Dr. Levine put us on the Serengeti or something. We were like on an overlooking the Serengeti, and we're like, scanning, and then he teaches us how to scan the whole environment and then scan like up and down and all around, and like however our eyes naturally want to orient, and how we cannot be curious and searching our environment and also be traumatized at the same time. So if we're like scanning our environment and searching and using our eyes to do whatever they want to search for exits or danger or anything like that, we can't also be traumatized in that same moment. And so teaching us how to do this, because my bees do the orientation. Like when I even chop a few branches that are hanging in front of their hives, they will literally come out and they will reorient, where they'll fly in circles around the hive to figure out like what the ground looks like, and then they'll fly away. And that's how they know when they come back into the hive, they know, okay, they've oriented, they know what they're going to be looking for when they come back. And so like I already had this concept of broad and narrow and orientation from my bees. So it was like, oh, okay, so I'm a bee and I'm orienting and I'm using my eyes however they feel like they want to go. So that was kind of cool. And so it's animal, getting back to the animal behavior. Animals orient. When they come out of a hive, they orient to see what is around them, what they're going to come back to. Is there danger? Is there fire, around the hive, or, whatever, or even if the hive has been moved, because, us beekeepers, we might ratchet down their hive in the middle of the night and move it a few hundred feet, you never know. So, them knowing where they are when they come out of the hive, and then they know where to come back to. So it's like animalistic behavior. And then the 12th phase was this kind of settling in the body. So there's like hand movements where you kind of go like this and like this, kind of hug yourself and just kind of calming, just settling. And that was all the techniques that were in the book portion and also the audiobook portion. And then there's a special section afterward on sexual trauma, which I have it like entirely highlighted, underlined, starred, everything, but it's like only like 3 pages, which was a little disappointing for me, as that's the basis of my recovery work. So I was a little disheartened by that. But it's basically the same thing. You track in your body where you felt, what you felt, and pendulating, going into it and out of it, into it and out of it, and then releasing. So it's I can see why he only put like a few pages in the back on sexual trauma, because it's basically the same process, but it's definitely more, at least for me, it's definitely more emotionally charged, more freeze triggering, and that kind of thing. So I was a little disappointed in that, but I guess it's my job to help you guys understand the recovery from the sexual trauma. That'll be my life goal. But and so in recovering from my own sexual trauma, I have found the pendulation and the knowing where I am in my body and the knowing what it feels like in my body has been priceless for me. So I can see how all of this feeds into the whole of healing, and how it heals the many facets of PTSD, whether you're a war veteran, whether you're a traumatized child, whether you've experienced a tornado or a fire, or whether you've experienced sexual trauma. This really can help by getting us self-aware of our bodies. And honestly, I feel like I probably should have done the body work before I did the emotional work, but I probably wouldn't have been able to handle the body work had I not done all the emotional work beforehand. So it's like healing the body is kind of like the ultimate resolution. So you do the emotional, intellectual, and the emotional flashbacks, the emotional literacy, and then you get down into the body. And you get down into the actual physiology and fixing it there. Not fixing it there, but releasing it, activating it, and then discharging it. So that was basically all of my notes. I know, one thing I forgot to mention on the animal part, the humans and animals coming out of shock and not being traumatized, the whole shaking and the acting through what we would have done had we not been immobilized. 2 instances for me, I have experienced this. The first was my C-section, my very first C-section with my oldest. It was an emergency C-section. I didn't know what was going on. It was traumatic. So after the C-section, I thought I was having a seizure. So they kept me in this room with 2 nurses just watching me. And I was literally shaking, could not stop shaking. I did it for well over an hour. And they kept me in this little room, and I thought I was having a seizure. I thought they were worried that, I'm internally bleeding, I'm having a seizure, I don't know what's going on. And I'm literally shaking, and I can't stop shaking, and I don't know why. And so I suppressed it, because they were like, if you don't stop shaking, you can't go see your baby. And so I was suppressing the shaking, and got it to a point where the shaking was maybe just Parkinson's-esque. And then they let me see the baby. And now I'm looking back after reading this book, and I was I was in a hospital, had just been literally torn open while away in an emergency situation. I was not prepared to be cut open at all. So and I literally puked while I was on the table being cut open. It was awful. So my body was literally, thought it had been gutted. And so my body was the parasympathetic nervous system was trying to kick in. It was literally this. These nurses didn't even know what was going on, or at least if they did, they were not competent enough to tell me what was going on. And so the most fascinating thing for me is that the medical society doesn't even understand this information. Had someone told me, your body was just cut open, your body thinks that you were attacked by an animal and gutted, so your body is trying to normalize and find homeostasis, so when you come out of shock, you shake really bad, just feel it, embrace it. Let it come in waves, however it's going to come, and it will release, and you will not be traumatized. Had they said that to me, you know, maybe I wouldn't be so messed up when it came to my other 2 C-sections, but they didn't. And so now I know, oh, hey, this is a trauma I need to work through. Yay, me. But anyway, and then the second one was kind of interesting to me because it was a time when I was going to try to date someone, and he ended up triggering me. He said something sexual that triggered me, and I reverted to, I don't even know what it was. I was literally a crying mess in the floor, shaking, rocking and shaking, and I didn't understand what in the hell was going on. Now I know, hey, well, and like I learned after that, you know, the words he used didn't really hold as much trigger anymore. Like, I was like, oh, like, you know, yeah, like that, those words used to really push me off the edge. And now it's like, oh, those are just kind of words now. And so I didn't really understand until reading this book that, wow, I had been triggered and my body naturally went through the activation and the discharge and released it. And like, I was like, wow, my mind was fucking blown. And so but that was only one of the traumas. So it was like, at least that one trauma is gone, so I don't have to like rework that one. But now I see, like, my body has naturally been trying to do this, whether or not the medical community or myself knew, my body knew. And so that was really cool. But basically, that's my takeaway from the Peter Levine book, Healing Trauma. I absolutely loved this little book. You know, the 90 pages were deceptive. I thought, 90-page book about trauma. Yeah, I'll do that one for my next Liberty's Library, but I really do recommend it, though. If you are suffering from PTSD or traumatic re-experiencing, definitely this book is fabulous. But if you guys need any help or want to talk to me about coaching, definitely go to the website selfcareforzombies.com or email me at selfcareforzombies@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to schedule a consultation or talk you through some of your own things. So with that, I will talk to you later. Bye.